Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 12, and just a little catch up on what's been going on in the last couple issues. We finally got the whole story of what happened in Newcastle and what exactly happened to all his friends back then with him. So we saw young John and all his young friends try to call a demon in order to battle another demon. Of course, this was a bad idea. It was a young John. He wasn't exactly sure what he was doing. So as he did his spell, he was calling a demon called Sagatara, but the demon who came was not Sagatara, because John had mixed up the symbols and the names and everything. So a demon that John did not know its name came, and that demon ended up being Nergal. But John didn't know that at the time, so he was unable to control the demon because he didn't know his name, and Nergal ended up eating and taking the soul of the little girl Astra, who had called forth the first demon. And that moment was the most scarring moment for John. He had to go to a mental facility after that for a while. And also all of his friends were cursed by Nergal that night, so that is why they all have died one by one throughout John's life. But finally, John figured out that the demon he had called was in fact Nergal, so now he knows its name, and he's also more skilled with magic. And we left the last issue with John realizing this, so it seems that he's going to get some kind of revenge for his friends and Astra. But first things first, we got the cover here for issue 12. We see two beings that kind of look like the Joker. They have big smiles on their faces, and their arms are out, and they're leaning against some kind of column or pillar, and their arms are actually melded in the middle, so each of them actually have only one arm in between them. And they actually look like they're statues or something because they're on either side of John, who's kneeling down in between them. They're super tall, and they also have a very Geiger-esque look to them, like if H.R. Geiger, who drew all the stuff for Alien, drew these human-shaped bodies, but they're leaning against a pillar that looks very Geiger. And John is hooked to a bunch of different colored circuits in the center, and also covering him is a pentagram. And there's an aura around John that's like a bright white light. And John's face kind of looks like he's praying or as if he's concentrating really hard. And we also see on this cover that it is written by Jamie Delano with art by Richard Piers Rayner and Mark Buckingham. And we start off on the first page as Nergal is coming through a hell dimension and appearing in the town of Newcastle. And he has the same weird looking grotesque body that's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different monsters and peoples that he had in the Newcastle issue last time. And over this panel of him coming through this dimensional portal, we get the narration that says, "The demon Nergal is in vile humor, his subtle machineries of deceit, stoked by a base conjurer's sleight of hand. Hell's honor is impugned. Face must be saved. The rash of humiliation salved with the ointment of revenge, or he must answer for his error." Then Nergal says out loud, "Where are you hiding, Constantine? In what nest of odor do you cower, grumbling amongst dung beetles? In which swamp do you huddle, shivering in the dark shadow of your elemental lord? Take no comfort, no sanctuary, for I have run fear's fever in your veins, and the sweet scent of boiling blood, pumped by the fluttering of your craven heart, will lead me to you." Then we cut to the junkyard that used to be the parking lot of the Casanova Club, which is the club where all the bad stuff that happened in Newcastle occurred. And we see amongst all the cars that are ruined and sitting in the junkyard, there is off to the side a little camper. And there's a bunch of symbols drawn on it, and we kind of focus in on it. And then when we cut to the inside of it, we see John Constantine just waking up, probably because he got a weird feeling from all the stuff that Nergal just said. And it looks like he's been burning the midnight oil inside of this camper because he fell asleep on top of an open book, and it looks like there was candles lit around him. And as he wakes up, he looks pretty frightened, and he says, "What? Who's there?" Then he looks around and he sees the candles on the table next to him have gone out while he was sleeping. So he kind of freaks out and he reaches for some matches, and his narration says, "Christ, I must have fallen asleep. All the bloody candles have gone out. Matches. Where'd I put the damn matches?" So then he finds the matches underneath the book on the table in front of him. And as he opens the box, it actually falls all the way open and all the matches fall out of it. And John thinks, "Struth, I've got the shakes bad today and I feel atrocious." Hope I'm not coming down with the bloody Shanghai flu. That'd be all I'm short of. So as John goes around lighting all the candles in the camper, he lights one in front of a mirror, and he gets a good look at his face once the light is on him. And we actually get a really good look at his face too, because it zooms in and we get a 3/4 splash page of just his face, and it is looking rough. It looks like boils are just covering almost every inch of his face. And as he sees himself in the mirror, he yells out, "Ah, Jesus Christ, what's happening? My goddamn face is falling off?" And we also see on this page, the name of the issue is The Devil You Know. But then John remembers something important, and his narration says, "Nergal, I'd forgotten. His blood is still in my system. I'm hidden by the magic, but that bastard is trying to flush me out by making me look like a Clearasil advert. Bad psychology. No one would go out with a mush like this." And as John finishes lighting all the candles, we see on the floor below him, there is a symbol of a 6-sided star with a bunch of other symbols around it. So it seems the demon Nergal is looking for John, and that is in fact why John came to Newcastle, because Nergal dropped some hints that that is where John should meet him. But I guess John has not figured out a plan yet, because even though he knows the name of Nergal, this isn't just some little demon. He's got to figure out a way that he can actually defeat him. So over these panels of John finishing lighting the candles, the narration says, "It's no joke though. I've been holed up in this scrapyard over a week, and I'm still no nearer to finding a way to destroy him. How do you kill an immortal who's been screwing up dabblers like me since the fall? Anger's not enough, nor hatred. If it was, I'd take him in my hands and tear him. But as it is, he'd tear me into hamburger." And as John thinks about this, he says out loud, "Bastard." Then John lays on the mattress inside the camper, and he begins to think, and his narration says, "No, I need a strategy. Of course, I'm on my own as well. The bog god be useful, but he's not interested. Too busy playing happy families. And all my human contacts are either dead or not answering the phone. Anyone would think I got some disgusting disease." Then John begins to laugh hysterically because he's kind of in a pickle, and then he sits up and reaches in his pocket for a cigarette. But when he reaches up, he finds a piece of mail in his pocket. So he pulls it out and opens it, and as he reads it, the narration says, "Great, it's the bloody gas bill. Must have picked it up in Paddington." Then he sees what he owes the gas company, and he says, "What? 20,000 quid for gas? I'm hardly ever there. They've got to be joking. Hold on. What's this up here?" And on the part of the bill that normally has the name of the company and the address that they're providing the service, it says, "Constantine, you treacherous bastard. I can get into your bank account too. Phone this number pronto, 0402-656-2715. And then it's signed RS. And John thinks for a second and says, "RS. It can't be, can it? But who else? It's got to be him. Somehow Richie Simpson's still alive, trapped in the computer reality." And if you don't remember, Richie is the friend of his that liked computers a lot, that was helping him out when he was trying to find where the Tongues of Fire were keeping Zed. And at the end of that issue, Richie ended up becoming trapped in the computer because his body on the outside spontaneously combusted. So not knowing what to do, John had just pulled the plug on his friend's computer, thinking that that would kind of put Richie out of his misery. But it seems Richie was not dead. He was alive inside the network, not just that one computer that John unplugged. So John, being very excited about this, he runs over to the phone and he dials a number, and the narration says, "Now this could be the break I've been waiting for. Struth, I hope we're still friends." And as someone picks up on the other line, John says, "Hello? Hello? Are you there, mate?" Then we cut to the inside of the computer dimension, as John called it, but I'm going to call it cyberspace, where we see the digital body of Richie floating around above a circuit board. And it's super cool because his body's all white, but he is outlined in pink. And then the circuit board below him is in blue. And these are all like neon colors of them. And as Richie moves around, we're seeing little sparks of yellow fly off of him. So as John says hello, Richie says back, "John, is that you? I can't be sure. So many hallucinations. Every second a lifetime." And then we cut to John, who's got a very surprised look on his face, like he can't believe he's actually talking to his friend Richie. But he continues saying, "Yes, mate, it's me. Listen, are you all right, like?" And Richie replies, "All right? How can I be all right when I'm lost in here? I'm scared. I'm lonely. You left me too long. Why'd you do it, John?" And then John lights a cigarette and says, "Couldn't be helped, mate. You got too close to heaven or whatever it was, and your body fritzed, went up in smoke." Then Richie kind of freaks out and says, "Oh God, no! Listen, you've got to get me out of here." And as John takes a drag of his cigarette, he says, "Sure, just tell me how." And Richie says, "It's all organized. I've had nothing better to do. There's a special order of hardware at Amstrad. It's all paid for and waiting to be delivered. Just tell me where you are." Then as we turn the page, we see that we're in hell once again, and Nergal is walking and he's saying,
"Where are you, Constantine? Reveal yourself."
So it seems he's still not found John, and the narration says, "Nergal is pressed. Hell does not suffer failure gladly." Then behind him, a voice says, "So, great Duke, your query still eludes you." And Nergal is a bit surprised by this, and he says,
"What? Who dares to uninvited broach my court?"
And the narration under this says, "Even an Archduke of Mendacity is not omnipotent. In hell, all knees must bend to the infernal hierarchy of pain." Then as Nergal turns his head, we see two white figures that we haven't seen before, and they're like pure white, and there's a man and a woman, and they're wrapped in barbed wire, and the man says, "It is we, Agony and Ecstasy, slave twins of the Inquisition." And the woman says, "The lords Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Belial call you to account." And then the man says, "The triumvirate of Hades expects the racking of this tedious human soul by dawn." Then we cut to John signing for a package that is being delivered to his house from a truck that says Amstrad on it. And the look on the delivery man's face as John is signing is that of pure disgust, because if you remember, John has boils all over him. So over this panel, the narration says, "I phoned the number Richie gives me, and by morning, the gears have arrived. The delivery man can't wait to get away. Don't blame him, really. I feel like the Phantom of the Opera." So it looks like the delivery man is dropping off about 6 or 7 boxes, and as John is moving them into his trailer, the delivery man is walking away and he's saying, "I'd help you get inside, but..." And then it cuts off because he's not getting any closer to John than he has to. Then we cut to John inside the trailer as he sets up all the equipment, and the narration says, "Following Richie's instruction, I put it all together. I could hardly get the plugs in for the trembling of my hands. Partly it's the fever, and partly it's the excitement." Then we see John hook himself up to some probes that are hooked into the machinery, and basically all this just looks like is a computer setup from the 80s, so you have a big glass monitor with a keyboard, but there's like a tower on the side of it with another tower that's hooked into, I'm assuming, cyberspace. So John tests it out by saying, testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me, Richie?" And then out of the computer answers, "Yeah, it's worked. The gate's opening up. Now you've just got to get me a body to move out into." And John didn't really think that far ahead, so he says, "A body? Jesus, mate. Hang about. Don't you think there might be a question of ethics here? Anyway, there's a rather pressing problem that I need your help with first. Can I get in there with you so we can talk face to face, so to speak?" Then Richie replies, "Sure. Just match your alpha waves to the computer pattern on the screen and let go." And I love this panel because we see John's face is overplanted with a circuit board, and John's eyes are super wide because I guess he's matching his alpha waves with the computer. Then in the next panel, we see John Constantine is floating inside of cyberspace with his buddy Richie. And as John is digitized into cyberspace, he says, "Hey, it's sort of like being in the astral dimension, but more mathematical. Still, no time for gabbing. Remember Newcastle? Well, I've tracked down the demon and worked out how to do the bastard." And Richie's kind of confused because I think he thought John was trying to find him to help him, but actually John just wants help from Richie. So he's kind of sad as he asks John, "What?" And John doesn't seem to notice how Richie's acting, and he says, "Yeah, only I need your help badly. So you scratch my back, and I'll see about finding you a new body. What do you say?" And Richie says, "I haven't got much of a choice, have I?" Then we cut back to Nergal's hell dimension, where the twins Agony and Ecstasy are taunting him, saying, "Choose, Duke Nergal. Do you come or do we take you? You failed. Your magic is weak. On Earth the dawn has come and gone, and still hell's shame is unavenged." But Nergal answers back, "Constantine's stronger than I thought, but his magic is archaic. It cannot sustain him for much longer." And Agony and Ecstasy answer, "Too late. The charlatan has bested you. Thrice now he has spat in the face of hell, and, by laws that bind us, thus wins liberty, while you, Duke, are compelled to tip the scales of justice in his place." And then Agony and Ecstasy begin to wrap barbed wire around Nergal, and he yells out, "No!" And they continue their sentencing by saying, "Therefore, you will accompany us and hear decreed the judgment that Hell's assembled ministers have agreed." But Nergal tries to beg, saying,
"No, please, listen."
But then he's cut off by a message from John Constantine that I guess John is projecting from cyberspace into this hell dimension, and he's saying, Nergal, I'm growing old waiting for you. Are you afraid of me? Come to Newcastle and taste defeat." And Nergal's super happy to hear this because he yells out,
"Ha! It's him! He dares to challenge me! Postpone your duty, Inquisitors! Release me!"
And Agony and Ecstasy say, "Very well. It seems this jester has a taste for sport. We'll wait until the contest has been fought." And as Nergal teleports into Newcastle, he says to Agony and Ecstasy,
"There will be no contest. I'll slit the carcass of this deranged dilettante and draw his soul, so you will hear it scream hell's praises to the very slopes of heaven."
Then a bright pink light appears in the middle of the junkyard in Newcastle, and the narration says, "Swelling, silently pregnant, clouds muster in the twisted metal night, then split to carelessly whelp, dropping violence their deformed offspring into a waiting world." Then we see Nergal in his human earth form, which looks more like a traditional demon as far as earth stories are concerned. Then we see Nergal smile as he turns and sees John's little trailer waiting there. Then in the next panel, we see Nergal bursting through the floor, and John yells out in surprise as he's still hooked to the computer, but he must not be actually in the computer anymore. And as Nergal bursts through the floor, he says,
"You are mine, Constantine."
And as John cowers in fears, he's speechless, and he's just repeating the word many times. And Nergal loves the sight of this, and he says,
"What? No eloquence? No words of wit rolling from the tongue like gleaming mercury? You disappoint me."
And then he grabs John by the head and he says,
"And so it is, John Constantine. I claim the soul long mortgaged to Inferno. You will accompany me below."
But John is just saying, but. And Nergal is confused. He says,
What? What trickery is this now? This poxed body is surely yours. I sense the kinship of our blood, but the spirit which drives it is not you. Where are you skulking? In the astral realm?"
And then out of the computer speakers, John says, "Close, mate, but no cigar. Lesson number 1. The root of all power is in naming. You taught me that. If you want me, you have to get it right." And Nergal looks at the speakers and says,
"Where are you? I cannot feel your presence on any natural plane. Are you hiding in this machinery? I mean to have you, Constantine."
And John tauntingly says, "You'd better come in and get me then, pal, because I'm sure as hell not coming out." And Nergal answers him,
"Very well, Constantine. But know that your prevarication can only serve to intensify your eventual misery."
And John answers from the computer, "Do leave it out, you pompous prat. I'm getting bored hanging around. My assistant will show you how to find me, if the ritual's too much for your primitive mind to grasp." So Richie, inside of John's body, helps attach the probes to Nergal's forehead. Of course, Richie is super freaked out and he's saying, Just look at the screen, study the patterns, and move out of your body." And then Nergal says,
"Pah! Science! The games of children! Mere prestidigitation into electronic reality."
And as Nergal's body appears in the digital zone of cyberspace, he says to John,
"Do you think that hiding in this playground will help you conquer me?"
And then John, who's not really hiding or anything, he's looking straight at Nergal and he says, "In a word, yes." And then he blows Nergal a kiss. Then it seems he realizes maybe he poked the bear a little too much because Nergal yells out in anger and then begins to chase him in cyberspace. So as John begins hiding and running from Nergal, we see Richie inside John's body typing away furiously, and the narration says, "Yeah, so far so good. Getting the demon in here has equalized the odds a bit. The bastard may be millions of years old and know all there is to know about magic, but on his time scale, computers were only invented yesterday." And as the narration is saying this, we're seeing John running through a bunch of different types of circuitry, and Nergal is getting held up by them as his body gets stuck And I'm not sure if Richie is the one who's putting up these barriers or if John is doing it with magic. But either way, cyberspace is definitely a learning curve for Nergal. And John's narration continues saying, all this is as new to him as to me. And while all his energy is tied up in cracking this maze, he won't have time to wonder where we're going. And on Richie's screen, it kind of looks like there's a maze of circuitry and there's a video game being played where John is kind of like Pac-Man or something, running through these circuit ways. And Nergal is obviously trying to get him, but he's getting stuck at different parts of the maze that John has kind of trapped him in. So John is feeling pretty good about this, and his narration says, plus, I've got Richie working on my side. I've just got to keep following the red paths while he throws switches on the outside. So it seems Richie is illuminating the correct way through this maze with a red light that John can follow, but Nergal can't see. But even with that, Nergal is still holding his own. He's breaking through Richie's traps, and he is fighting his way to Constantine. And he's getting madder and madder as he does this, and we can see it in Nergal's face as he looks at John from afar. And seeing this anger kind of puts a little bit of doubt in John's head about this plan, because he says about Richie, Christ, I hope he keeps it together. And then about Nergal, I've wound old Nergal up to 90. If he gets to grips with me now, there won't be any time for talking. And as Nergal looks at John from afar, he says, Constantine, stand and fight. And John, looking kind of scared, says, no bloody chance. What do you take me for, stupid? And then Nergal breaks through the last little barrier that he was trying to get through, and he rushes for John. And John takes off running down what looks like the last path he has to go, because there's like a circuit path that is disappearing into a blue void, which I'm assuming is John's way out of here. So as John runs from Nergal, his narration says, a demon has an addict's hungry heart, blindly unswerving in its need for agony. And once his prey has kindled savage lust, a frenzy banishes all craft until his terrible thirst is assuaged. So under this narration, we see John pause right in front of the portal, and as Nergal is about to catch up to him and grab him, John yells out, now, Richie, do it now! Then Richie, of course, hits enter on the keyboard, and something begins to happen. The vortex begins to open, and John begins to climb on this white light that's coming through. And Nergal seems blinded by it, and he says, what? Ah, that ghastly light. What is this place? And as John hangs onto the light, he says, I'll give you 3 guesses, pal. And Nergal finishes his sentence saying, cherubim, seraphim, angels. You have lured me to the edge of heaven. I am destroyed. And as John looks down at Nergal from the top of this vortex that he's climbed on, he yells out, yeah, that's right. Got you in one, you bastard. Then we see angels come through the portal and begin to grab and attack Nergal. And as John watches, the narration says, the blizzard of light swarms from heaven's outraged eye. I watch him shake with terror's epileptic spasms. And as the angels grab hold of Nergal to pull him into heaven, he pleads with them saying, no, my trespass was not malevolent, please. But we see one of the angels grab hold of his neck and wrench off Nergal's head and pull his body into this vortex of light. And over that, the narration says, he gibbers, pleading. I like to hear that. I like to hear him scream. I like to see him suffer. It's true. Revenge is sweet. I savor it, watching the white fury of lacerating jewels. Then we see angels tearing the rest of Nergal's body apart, and blood begins to rain from the vortex down onto John. And his narration continues. The pure rage of justice, like terrible winged swords, decimating his foul substance, until he is no more than a fine soft rain, roseate against the light of life, a poetry of death. And then Nergal's body and blood disappear and get pulled finally all the way into the light, and we are left with an angel looking down on John from this white vortex. And the narration says, too soon. It's finished and the show is closing. I don't know where anyone ever got the idea that angels were beatific. They scare the crap out of me. And then the vortex closes and John begins to fall away from it. And as John falls through cyberspace, his narration says, I guess that's as close to heaven as I'm likely to ever get. Jesus, though, I can't hardly believe that I did it. Annihilated him. Completely obliterated him. Demons aren't omnipotent. I fought one, and I won. Better get back to my body now, though. I'm gasping for a smoke. Then we cut to outside the computer where Richie inside of John's body is disconnecting the little probes that were on his head. And he can hear John from the computer say, "Hey, Richie, we did it, mate. You were right. It was heaven. He walked straight into it, and they ripped him to bloody shreds. What happened to his body? Did it spontaneously combust like yours did?" And we can see the body of Nergal just kind of leaning forward in its chair because there's nothing inside of it now. It's just an empty husk. And Richie actually gives it a shove a little bit and has a smirk on his face. And then he says to John in the computer, "No, John, I unplugged it." And John doesn't like the sound of that inside of the computer. And he says, "You unplugged it? What the hell for? What are you up to, mate?" And then Richie inside of John says, "Oh, nothing much. Just a bit of body snatching." And then he gets this kind of like evil look on his face. And John in cyberspace says, "Body snatch? Wait a minute." But Richie cuts him off saying, "I'm sorry, John, but you can't expect me to go back there voluntarily. You're being evicted. And who knows what mischief we might get up to if I let you into that demon's empty shell. The world will be a safer place with you in there." And while Richie is saying this, he notices there's like a pull-up bar in this camper, I guess. So he decides to do some pull-ups to test his new body out. And as he's attempting pull-ups, you hear John say from the computer, "Oh well, suit yourself, mate. That body's totally crocked anyway, in case you hadn't noticed." And Richie's starting to notice that the body is definitely not in shape, at least, because he falls down to the ground coughing from the pull-up bar. And John continues, "It's dying, mate, riddled with disease. Why else do you think I'd chance a crazy stunt like this? I give you 3 days at most." And of course, none of this is true. This is all John bluffing because he knows that Richie can see the boils on his body. So Richie actually believes this and he yells out, "Damn you, Constantine!" And John sarcastically answers back, "It's already been tried, pal. Look, your best chance has to be the demon's body. What have you got to lose?" So Richie picks up a handful of the electrodes and he looks at them and says, yes, maybe you're right." And we hear John say, "Think of the power, Richie. You could do anything." So John is really hamming it up, making it seem like being inside of a demon is going to be an awesome thing for Richie. And Richie is buying it hook, line, and sinker. So Richie hooks up John's body and Nergal's body to the computer through the electrodes. And we hear John ask from the computer, "What do you say, Richie?" And as John says that, we see John's body go limp and Nergal's body begin to stand up. And then we see John's body begin to move again, this time from John's consciousness going inside of it. And he looks up at Nergal, who's standing above him smiling, and he says, "Did you do it, Richie? What's it like?" And at first it looks like Richie was having a good time inside of this new body, but then all of a sudden his face begins to, I don't know, sweat or melt or something. He's actually clawing at it, and it seems like it's very painful as he says, Oh, it's so huge and dark, like a shipwreck at the bottom of the deepest ocean's trench. There are snagging hooks tearing me. There are brittle, scuttling things like crabs made of glass, and a howling like a constant wind of tortured souls. It's too big. It's stretching me. I can't fill it." And as Richie inside of Nergal's body falls to the ground, and whatever was coming out of his face, whether it was sweat or something else, it begins to come out of all over his body, and he's covered in this weird white liquid that looks, maybe it's like pus or something. And as he writhes on the ground in pain, he yells, "There is rot and putrefaction. It is dying around me, leaving me squirming in the mire like a new naked worm." And as John watches this, he says, "Struth." And he reaches out like he's going to try to take Richie's hand to comfort him. But then he pulls away as that body of Nergal kind of, I guess, melts completely. And then a digital version of Nergal and Richie together kind of rise in a ghostly form out of Nergal's melting body. And it's kind of funny because it's like Nergal with glasses. And as this cyber spectral version of Richie rises from the ashes of Nergal, he says, "But as this body dies, I build another more suited to my needs and live. Ah, Constantine, if you only knew, with the energy that's coursing through me, I could rule the world." So I guess because Nergal's body is super powerful, it is a demon's, Richie is able to make himself this new digital construct that is actually in our reality, but it's like a pink body that has circuitry all over it. It's got Richie's face, but it's all bulky and muscular like Nergal was. And as John watches this, he says, "Oh, bloody hell." And his narration says, "As if there aren't enough megalomaniac mutants,
and superpowered freaks roaming about this sorry planet already. So as Richie is going around the junkyard, kind of lifting cars and stuff, and he's getting acquainted with his new body, John follows him out there and he says, "So Richie, me old mate, are you a good guy or a bad guy?" And Richie looks at his fingers and he makes some like needles kind of come out of the tips of them and he says, "I don't know. I haven't decided yet." And then John, of course, tries to play it cool and he pulls out a cigarette and he says, "I suppose you'll be changing your name too. Richie Simpson's not much of a handle when it comes to a tough image, is it? Got a light?" And then John gets startled because Richie does have a light, but it's a laser that he shoots out and he lights the cigarette with. And John says, "Ta, oh well, better the devil you know." And then Richie lands on a car next to John and he says, "Quiet, something's coming." And John seems alarmed by this, and the narration says, "For a moment, I think it might be a lightning strike. Then I smell the brimstone." And then there's a big flash right next to John and Richie, and John has to dive to miss, getting blasted by the energy that just appeared. So he falls on the ground, and as he looks up, his narration says, "I suppose it was too good to be true. I should have known hell would be a sore loser." And as John looks up at this blinding white energy, two figures appear out of it, and it is Agony and Ecstasy. And they look at John, and one of them says, "Constantine." And John looks up at them and says, "Yeah." And they continue, "The lords of hell decree that, by the rules of engagement, you have achieved victory. But do not think, because this once you've vanquished a senile demon, you would be so fortunate again." And as John pushes himself up from the ground, he says, "You mean that's it? I can go?" And Agony and Ecstasy reply, "Of course. Hell is eternal, and we know that when your time in this place is over, you'll join us willingly in the other." And as John stands up, he turns with his back facing them, and he walks away, and he says, "Well, maybe catch you later then, but I wouldn't hold your breath." And then Agony and Ecstasy shoot out some barbed wires and grab Richie, and they say, "Not you, imposter! Fool! Do you think that it is permitted to so casually take on the mantle of a devil and strut the world as if it were a stage on which you acted out your whims?" And then they begin to pull the barbed wire tighter around Richie, which makes his limbs pull into him, and he's all tangled up in it. And Agony and Ecstasy continue, "Let us tell you, it is not so. One day, perhaps, when you have learned your craft and risen through the ranks, you may be allowed to travel beyond purgatory. We are the slave twins of the Inquisition. You are committed to our custody and will be accompanying us below, where, under torment, you must spend at least 10,000 years discovering the 1,000,000 degrees of agony and ecstasy." And as they pull Richie back to hell with them, he yells out, "No!" And as we turn the page, we see John is still in the junkyard. He's just sitting on top of one of the cars. And of course he's smoking. And his narration says, "Christ, those two bastards made old Nergal seem almost cuddly. Poor old Richie. Never would have thought he had it in him. Still, it's always the quiet ones, isn't it? I suppose I should feel sorrier for him than I do. But right now, all I really feel is a sort of empty, lightheaded relief. It's as if the coils of a huge, constricting snake that's been squeezing the life out of me for the past 10 years had slipped away, and I can breathe again. For the first time since Newcastle, when I poisoned myself with a stupid lust for power, I'm conscious of standing on the brink of future, rather than on the tail of past. I sought out my demon and conquered him. Now, if this species is going to have any chance of survival, we all have to face the demons inside of us. We have to turn inwards, enter the siege perilous, and wrestle. It's not those grotesque, tired institutions of heaven and hell that are the problem. It's the devil you know." And as he says this last line, he takes a car mirror and he turns it towards his face, and he looks at himself in the mirror, and it seems like his boils are starting to go away. But it also looks like he's talking about the devil he knows, which is himself. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.